Pete, I want to get into the actual A&R process. And one of your biggest, most successful A&R stories is the story of Carlos Santana's comeback album, Supernatural, and the worldwide smash, Smooth. It's the stuff of A&R legend. And for a couple reasons. Number one, it was also your idea to make the album a concept of artists collaborating with Carlos. So my question is a couple things. What was your inspiration for that concept? And number two, can you also talk to us about the finding and developing, yes, I said developing, of the smash hit song Smooth? Because there is a great A&R story behind the development of that song. So on both of those.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, and this speaks towards what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, which is kind of the long lost art of A&R. A&R stands for two things, artists and repertoire. And the repertoire is as important as the artist. Without one, you don't have the other. You know, when you're able to pair the brilliant song with the peerless voice, you have Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. You have Aretha Franklin, Respect. You have Frank Sinatra, Strangers in the Night. You know, that is kismet. That doesn't happen. That's like lightning, striking, right? So for me, when I got to Arista in 1997, I was around 30 years old. Clive hired me, but I don't think he, was expecting anything. I think that he, his gut told him to give me a shot, but it's not like I had signed, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Nirvana, before that. I had a couple of hits, but I think he was taking a chance on me. And I came in like day one to Arista Records in 1997, really without a manual of how to do A&R for Clive Davis. Rich, you did it.
Yeah.
It's like, a lot of really, really great A&R people have worked for Clive Davis and not succeeded at his company just because he's very, very specific and very particular about how A&R is done.
Right.
And there's no manual saying this is how you do it here. You get thrown in the deep end of the pool and you either swim or you drown. And so I was there around 6 weeks trying to figure out my way in because I didn't have anything I wanted to sign. And Clive's not the A&R person, or he wasn't back then, the label head, who was going to assign you a project. Things are done collectively there. And he had just signed Santana. He signed Santana before I got there in the summer of 97. And of course, he had signed Santana for a second time, having signed him in 1969 to Columbia. And Clive's vision is always like, what if? What if I could bring Rod Stewart back or Aretha Franklin back or Santana back? And I think that was more the headline in his imagination than it was, hey, this is how we're going to do it. So when I came in, I had plenty of time because I didn't have any projects there. And I had been there for around a month and a half. And like I said earlier, I was a student of pop music from a very, very early age. And so I was always paying attention to what the audience was reacting to and the audience was responding to. And there was a record, an album that was selling back in that era in 1997, selling better than it should have. And it was a duets album by B.B. King, and it was called Deuces Wild. And I remember seeing it on the charts and saying, oh, B.B. King doesn't usually chart, record albums now, in the late 90s. Why are people buying this record? So I listened to the record, and it was a duets record. It was B.B. King with Tracy Chapman, B.B. King with Bonnie Raitt, B.B. King with D'Angelo. And I'm like, oh, really interesting concept. And then I listened to the record, and I'm like, there's a ceiling here. Any A&R person would be able to listen to it and say, yeah, this isn't going to get on pop radio because, and if it did, back then, if it didn't get on pop radio, you had a ceiling. You weren't going to sell millions and millions of records. And the reason that it wasn't going to get on pop radio is because the songs weren't pop hits. They were covers of B.B. King songs, and there were other songs that were just not going to go all the way as pop hits. And also, as a duet album, you had B.B. King singing, and his voice was an older voice at that point. Older voices don't make it on contemporary radio. So my idea was to completely steal the concept from B.B. King, but tweak it so that what I would do is I would go to the library, because this was before the internet, and I would go and I would study every single contemporary hit artist who had given an interview and mentioned Carlos Santana as a reason, an influence that they got into music in the first place. And if I'm able to find that person, then I'm able to make that phone call and say to them, hey, how would you like to collaborate with Carlos Santana? And then before I agree to it, I would say, get them all excited about collaborating with their hero, and then say, not so fast, price of admission, one hit song. What I knew is that Carlos doesn't sing, or he doesn't sing like B.B. King sang. His voice is the guitar. So the guitar voice, unlike the human voice, doesn't age. And so if we can get the contemporary pop stars of the day to write a hit song for Carlos Santana, who can then duet with them on his guitar, I've got a shot to maybe get a great song on the radio. So I really liked this idea that I had, even though it was stolen from somebody else and then tweaked, as all great ideas usually are. But I still had to run the idea by Clive. And back then, Clive didn't do email. I still don't think he does email. But the email that I wrote, I printed out, I put it on his assistant's desk, and I basically spelled out the blueprint of how I would envision this album. And I waited for him to get back to me, and he never got back to me. He never told me it was a great idea. He never told me it was a lousy idea. He just didn't respond. And so I was the new guy. I was flustered. I didn't know what to do because I couldn't say, why didn't you respond to my email? But I believed in the idea. So, having some chutzpah, I picked up the telephone. I called Carlos Santana's then manager. I introduced myself. He didn't know who I was. And I said, I have an idea for Carlos. He's like, great. We haven't heard from anyone at the label with any creative ideas since we signed. What's your idea? And I ran it by him. And he's like, great. When can we start? So I said, you know what? I haven't gotten Clive's blessing, but I'm going to start anyway. And if Clive wants me to start, he's the head of the label. He's my boss. If he wants me to stop, rather, he'll tell me to stop. So I started. He never told me to stop. And we ended up selling 30 million records.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So now the other part to that is, one of those songs was the leadoff single
with Rob Thomas,
which has its own story and it has its own development, which is unusual for a hit song. And I was wondering if you could tell that, because I think that that's a very, very informative. I mean, you want to get to the heart of what A&R actually does. That's a great story. And I was wondering if you could share it with us.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's interesting that we talk about something like this because I've got friends who are great A&R people and great creative publishing A&Rs as well. And some of them, if they hear a song and the song doesn't sound like a hit to them, they throw it in the garbage and move on to the next song. I've never been like that. I've always been like, if there is a piece of something in this song that could be turned into a hit, it's incumbent on me as the A&R person to try to see that through. And that's exactly what happened with Smooth, where I was finishing this album that I had been working on for a year and a half. We spent a lot of money because at that point we had a lot of pretty big guest stars on the album who all cost a lot of money. And remember, Santana hadn't had a gold record in close to 20 years at that point. And so people started, coming to me and saying, what are you doing? You're like spending all this money on an artist who is arguably past his prime. You're going to lose a lot of money for the record label. Even Clive said to me at one point, he's like, I think money grows on trees around here. But I figured, I figured that if we're going for it, we're going to go for it. We're going to go all in and we're going to go big or we're going to go home, and there are certain projects that you do that with, and this was one of them. And we could have easily, lost everything, but sometimes when you go all in, the risk is worth it. And so I had to finish the record. Somebody stopped by my office, one of the guys in charge, and said, hey, we have to get this record out before the end of the fiscal year. This was in January. The fiscal year ended in June, at the end of June. and said, we have to get this album out before the end of June because we think we'll be able to ship 100,000 units. And we need those numbers for our year-end budget. And I said to him, I'm not finished yet. He's like, Pete, you're finished. Finish up. You're done. We got to get this record out. And I had this nagging doubt, even though we had some really good songs, that we were missing a first single. So as luck would have it, and I'm kind of getting nervous that I'm going to miss the deadline here because now I'm up against it. I get a call from an A&R friend of mine. His name is Jerry Griffith. Great A&R guy.
Oh, yeah. I worked with Jerry at Arista. Yeah. He was the one who turned Clive on to Whitney.
He was. And Jerry and I became friendly. And when I got to Arista, I would call him anytime that I was unsure of how to navigate these Clive waters because he had done it so well for a long time. And so we became friends. And one day, as I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to finish this record, Jerry calls me. And I hadn't spoken to him for a while. And he says, hey, are you still working on Santana? I said, yeah, it's good timing because I got to finish. I need one more song. He's like, oh, I met this guy. I may start managing him. He's a songwriter. He lives in New York. His name is Ital Shur. He had a hit, within the last few years by Maxwell called Ascension. He's a real muso. I told him about Santana. He said he's got a ton of ideas. Can he come up and see you? And at that point, I was open to anything because I didn't know if we were going to find this song and if we were going to find it, who was going to come through the door with it. And I learned a long time ago, you can never say no. You got to listen to everything. So Ital comes in and he plays me a song that he had written for Santana called Room 17. And I listened to the song, and Ital and I had never met before. And the song ends, and I say to him, look, you want the good news or the bad news? I said, the good news is that this track is really good. The track is like classic Santana, but modernized. The lyric is ridiculous. I mean, he's never going to sing this song. Room 17 is the hotel room where, the guy and the girl are going to meet and get it on, right? And that's the opposite of, Mr. Peace and Love, Carlos Santana. It's just not going to happen. And he starts saying to me, I think you're wrong. This is a hit song. I'm like, I think you're wrong. I think it's half a hit song. Give me the track. Throw away your lyric, throw away your melody. I don't think either of them is viable. And we start arguing with each other. This is the first time we're meeting. Finally, I wrestle the track out of him. And this is before MP3s. This is before, you could easily kind of press a button and just, send a track by email to somebody. So he goes back to his studio. He removes the lyric after, he and I go at it a little bit. And he removes the lyric and the melody and just gives me the track. And like I said, unlike now, you can't email this around because the technology didn't exist back then. So I'm listening to this track, and the more I listen to it, the more excited I get. But now we've got to get somebody to write to it. So I call up a buddy of mine who's a music publisher at the time at EMI Music Publishing, and that was Evan Lamberg, who now is at Universal Music Publishing and is still a dear, dear friend of mine to this day. I called him up and I said, Evan, I have this track that I need somebody to write to. And I literally held up the receiver of the phone to play him the track. And I said, do you have any ideas for this? And I play him the track. He's like, that's really good. Who is that for? Santana? I'm like, yeah, I think it could be, if I get the lyric right, this could be the final song for the album. It could also potentially be the first single. He's like, Pete, I know who should write it. I said, who? He said, Rob Thomas. And I'm like, who? Rob Thomas? From Matchbox 20? Remember, this is 1999. Rob Thomas wasn't Rob Thomas back then. Matchbox 20 was a pretty good band, but they were they were in a part of groups like Collective Soul and bands like that nobody knew who the lead singer was. They knew the songs on the radio, right? So he said to me, he's like, Pete, do you trust me? I said, Evan, your ears are as good as anybody I know. Of course I trust you. He's like, Pete, don't tell this to any other songwriter that I work with, but Rob Thomas is the best songwriter I've ever signed. And I'm like, you're kidding. He's like, trust me. He's like, can I send the track to Rob? I'm like, absolutely. So he sends the track to Rob. And sometimes, when the stars align, you have no idea, what's going on kind of in the ether, in the universe. Turns out that Rob had just come off the road touring with Matchbox 20 for a long time. And he was finally off the road with his fiance, living in the West Village in New York. His fiance, as Kismet would have it, was Spanish. He hears this track and he decides to write a love letter to his fiancée Marisol. And Evan calls me a week later and says, Rob wrote to that track. He's going to come up to my office. If you want to meet us, he'll play it for us. So I go up to Evan's office at EMI Music Publishing. Rob comes, first time I'm meeting Rob. And they play the track, the same track that I had sent to Evan for Rob to write to. And Rob starts singing to it, reading lyrics off a lined yellow legal pad. And he starts singing this song. And the song ends, and he looks at Evan, his publisher, and Evan looks at Rob and says, Rob, that's amazing. You nailed it. That's a smash. And Rob says, thanks, Evan. And they both look at me, and I'm shaking my head. And Evan's like flashing me daggers, like, why are you shaking your head? This guy just sold millions of Matchbox 20 records. You know, you're making me look bad here. You know, you're embarrassing me. And I said, Rob, I don't think that you're all the way there yet. And to Rob's credit, he's like, why not? What do you hear? And I said, go to your chorus. And so he goes to the chorus, which at the time was the part of the song that said, and if you say this life is good enough. And I'm like, I don't think that's a chorus. I think that's a pre-chorus. I think you can beat that melodically and lyrically. And he said, okay, let me try it. So he goes back a week later. We do it again. He's like, what do you think of this? And he sings a new melody to a new part that he's written. The part of, and if you say this life is good enough, that becomes then he sings a new melody that ultimately became the chorus of Smooth. But in the category of Nothing Is Ever Easy, the original lyric is, give me something hot to make me move, get my motor running so I can get to you. You've got the kind of loving that can be so smooth. Give me your heart, make it real, or forget about it. And I say to Rob, I'm like, oh my God, you're onto something. But the first two lines of this song, get my motor running? What is this, Born to Be Wild?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
it's like,
Exactly.
and Evan turns to me, he's like, Pete, I know Rob's writing really well. I don't think he wrote that line. And I say to Rob, I'm like, Rob, did you write that line? He's like, no, I felt bad for Ital. He wrote the line because it was his idea. I'm like, how about we not feel bad for Ital? Do you have a line there in your mind that you would have done if Ital wasn't given those two lines to write? He's like, yeah. I said, what are they, Rob? He's like, well, my lines are just like the ocean under the moon. That's the same as the emotion that I get from you. I said, Rob, do you want to call Ital and tell him, or should I?
Wow. Yeah.
So that's how we got the song. But again, nothing is ever easy. At this point, Clive Davis has no idea that this is going on. You know, I have these guys re-demoed the song 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, until my ears tell me that now is the time that it's right. And this demo can be played for Clive. So I go into Clive's office. It was an A&R meeting at the time. And there are like 5 or 6 other people in the room. And I play him the song. And I'm like literally holding my breath because I've spent nothing but, you know, time on this song, kind of Frankensteining monster, this idea that once was Room 17 and then was Born to Be Wild and now it's Smooth. And if Clive doesn't like it, it's going to die right here, right now, right? And so I hold my breath for what seems like 3.5 minutes. The song ends. Clive looks at me. He's like, I love it. I'm like, really? It's that easy? He's like, I love it. That sounds like a smash.
And that's not something you hear all the time from
right,
Clive. It's,
right. Well, never from Clive.
Never. Exactly.
So finally, I exhale. He's like, what does Carlos think of it? I'm like, Clive, I haven't played it for Carlos yet. Because, you know, if you didn't like it, what was I going to do? Have him fall in love with it? He's like, oh, I love it. Send it to Carlos. So I exhale. I'm really excited because now it's the easy part. Send it to Carlos. But of course, nothing is ever easy. I send it to Carlos. His manager calls me the next day and says, Carlos hates the song you sent him. He will never, ever record this song.
Wow. Oh, God.
So, you know, it's like a fucking marathon of just one idea to finish this album. You know, and luckily, you know, I finally, after a week of pleading with Carlos Santana, got the manager to say to me, Pete, he's not going to record the song. He hates it. But with all due respect, He's known you now for 2 years. He's known Clive Davis for 30 years. If Clive Davis tells him himself that the song is a hit, he'll try it. So I have to go to Clive's office again and say, Clive, Carlos heard the song. He's not convinced that it's right for him or a hit song. He needs to hear it from you. And so Clive, as Clive will do, says to me, Pete, sit down, take out a notebook, and I'm going to dictate a fax, and you're going to type it up and send it to Carlos. And it basically said, Carlos, I understand that you're having questions about this song, but trust me on this. We're going to get the right producer. We're going to, get the right band. This song has the potential to be a big, big hit for you. And Carlos gets the fax, calls me back and says, thank you for doing what I asked you. I will agree to record the song. And then once he recorded the song, he started to like it. Then it became our first single, and the rest is history.
Wow. So did you follow the song as he was doing it, or did he just send you a finished mix, or in the recording process?
I wasn't in the studio with them. Matt Serletic, who had produced all the Matchbox 20 records at that point, went out with Rob Thomas and Carlos's band, and they recorded it.
Okay.
And so that was his job. And there's one more funny story, which is when Matt sent me his recording. Remember, I'm like all in on this. I'm Robert De Niro on this. I've spent nothing but smooth 24/7 for the last month. So, of course, I have the worst case of demo-itis that you've ever gotten in your lifetime. So when I heard Matt's recording of the song, I was convinced that he had ruined the song because he put on this telephone effect on Rob's vocal on the verse. And when I heard it, I was like, what is he doing? In hindsight, that effect on the final version of the song works because it makes the verse feel smaller and makes the chorus feel bigger when you take the effect off. I didn't see that at the time. But this is the genius of Clive Davis. I run into Clive's office and I'm like, Clive, I've got Smooth back from Matt Serletic. He ruined the song. Listen to it. And I play it for him. And the genius of Clive is he looked at me and he knows demo-itis when he sees it. He's like, Pete, you did your job finding the song. Now let Matt Serletic do his. Get out of my office. And he was absolutely right. And Matt was absolutely right. And all of us, to this day, like guys who were in a foxhole in Vietnam, we still joke about that. Whenever I see Matt Serletic, he's like, Pete, how's that telephone effect doing? Like, so.